Yeah, no, thanks, Jeff, and Dwayne, thanks again for offering up an interesting talk. As I mentioned, we'll record this, we'll get it out to everyone, UK, US, South America, Australia. We've had loads of people kind of show interest in them, in getting the content, even if the timing necessarily doesn't work for them. So for those of you that haven't been on one of these before, this is the Tampa Bay Azure user group. Jeff's been running this for a number of years, and recently myself, Sam, and Matt have been getting involved. We work for a company called Azure Associates, who are a cloud technology recruitment company. We ultimately help teams across predominantly Florida secure cloud technology professionals, and also help candidates secure roles that they're interested in that can offer them opportunities to learn and grow in the future. So yeah, we love meetups. We wanted to partner with Jeff, and yeah, we love learning ourselves whilst we're not developers or DevOps engineers. We're also establishing a Slack chat over the next couple of weeks, which will give everyone here or kind of anyone in the group an opportunity to talk about tech, talk about meetups, suggest ideas for future talks. It's something that we run for you. So yeah, make sure you sign up to that. There'll be a jobs listing as well in case you're looking, and any suggestions on how to keep this meetup exciting. We're fully aware that people may be experiencing Zoom fatigue. It's kind of, yeah, something that which we've been doing now for a few months, and it looks like it's going to continue virtually. So yeah, any ideas, then shout to us. And without further ado, I'll hand you over to Dwayne with his talk on protecting your Azure data house. Thank you, Jay.
Great, thank you very much, Elliot. Thanks for the introduction. That's really, I enjoy these user groups and the different directions that they all have. You know, I have my own user group in Michigan where we, you know, I try and keep that inclusive environment. So, but I know what you're saying about Zoom fatigue and virtual meeting fatigue. So, but let's get into what we're going to talk about today. So, one of the things, you know, so obviously data security and best practices in data security are huge. So what we're going to talk about is how are we going to protect Azure and protect our house, and I'll explain what I'm talking about in terms of our Azure house here shortly. And to introduce myself, I'm Dwayne Natwick. I am a Microsoft Azure MVP and also a cloud training architect lead for Opsagility and Skill Me Up. We provide, we author, train, and provide content on our Skill Me Up platform, as well as instructor-led training to organizations directly, or to users can subscribe to the Skill Me Up platform and learn about Azure, Microsoft 365, Microsoft Dynamics, and prepare yourself for exams or just to go and learn out there. And one of the great things about our platform is we provide rich lab content in the environments when we develop our training. I'm also Microsoft certified in multiple Azure and M365 roles, which include also the M365 Security Administrator and the Azure Security Engineer. And I'm a Microsoft certified trainer and a regional lead for that. And you can find me active on social media at the links on this slide. So what are we going to talk about today? Yep, can you hear me all right? What?
Yeah, hey Dwayne, just real quick, in terms of questions from the audience, do you want them to post in a chat? Do you want to make this interactive? Would you rather the questions wait for the end?
Yeah, if they could post it in the chat and then we'll do Q&A at the end. Would be best, probably.
Okay.
We'll get into some technology, some of the Azure technologies and everything in this, and we'll do some demo at the end. And maybe before we go into the demo, I'll hit some of the questions. If any of them are in the chat, we can do that as well.
Okay.
So,
all right. Thank you.
So, no problem. Thank you very much. Setting the groundwork, always good. What we're going to talk about, and what I'll kind of frame this conversation in around the data, you know, what the data challenges are around security and access to information, and then take that a step further into what is, you know, how we do continue to provide access and accessible and available data. And then what are the options around the public cloud in terms of Azure for accessibility, confidentiality, availability, integrity, compliance, all of those things that go into the availability of data, and then as well as the integrity and protection of data. And then what are some ways that then we can deliver that secure and accessible data to users. And we'll go into, at the end here, some ways to govern all of that within the Azure environment as well. So let's start with some of the data protection challenges, and to just set the groundwork to what we look at in terms of, from a security standpoint, what threatens our data and what threatens our personal information, our corporate information, and even our customer and client information. And there's two real factors to that. And those of you that may be in security know this already, but there's the internal threats and then there's the external threats. And external threats is what we think about in most cases in terms of denial of service attacks, brute force attacks, somebody trying to exploit vulnerabilities within our environment. All of those external factors that we try and keep those kind of malicious attacks out of our environment. But there's also a good portion of internal threats as well, and a lot of those are caused by shadow IT and different patch vulnerabilities, not keeping your security patches up to date, elevated privileges, developmental backdoors, and then different perimeter threats that might be held in terms of a physical environment, which isn't really pertain to the cloud environment, but things we have to take into account of who has access to what, both physically and digitally. And to protect that, and when we start talking about with the security house, I like to think about this defense in depth and building a security posture from the same perspective as building a house. There are layers of protection that we create when we architect our home, when we and how we secure our home. That is that defense in depth. And the more layers that we put in place to protect our environment, the less likelihood that an attacker is going to get to the middle, that is our data, which is what is important to our organization, both the data of our personnel, the data of our organization, our financial data, all of our customer information. We need to protect all that, and we have these layers that we can put in place through different building security, access controls, firewalls, virtual networks, hardening of operating systems, encryption, and then having that all being monitored and managed through a portal, to maintain and understand from activity logging and policy management of how we're going to keep that data protected. When we talk about physical security, we don't have much insight into that when we talk about moving to the Azure environment, but everything else here really becomes of the utmost importance, especially as we get more and more into cloud native applications. Identity and access becomes number one in terms of our security and how we're protecting things at a perimeter level. So then, from that standpoint, I think of what is how do we kind of look at this from the standpoint of our house, and what those pieces are to the puzzle, and how do we relate that to how we protect our house, well, from a cyber security and cyber defense standpoint versus our own home. And just to simplify it down to correlating it to, we have our building security in a data center, which is really the fence, the doors, how we have everything locked, and then we have our access control. Our access control within our homes is things like garage door openers, the keys, and a smart lock maybe with an app that's controlled by a Face ID, things like that. Is how we control what role we have in getting into our own house, and that others don't have that role and have that access to that environment. And then we start segmenting our environment with internal doors and separate rooms and locks on those internal doors that are still building more defense within our environment. And that's kind of similar to segmenting with firewalls and port rules and virtual networks and VLANs, encrypted transmissions, hardening of our operating systems. We're now building more protection within our environment, and then putting additional protections there with API management, encrypting and classifying of our data, such as putting jewelry in different lock boxes and protecting our financial records in lock boxes. And then having then a correlation to the monitoring and management is having alarm systems that are monitoring our environment, Ring doorbells, security cameras, generators that keep the continuity of our business, all fall into that security house, and how we're going to build our blueprint for the defense in depth approach in terms of our cybersecurity. And when we talk about the protection and as we start to move into the public cloud, we start to think and talk about more around where that responsibility lies. And there's a shift once you start moving into cloud environments around what you have responsibility for from an on-premises environment versus a cloud environment. And there's the three factors and the three types of services within cloud that there's different responsibilities for. There's the infrastructure as a service, which you have the most responsibility on. It's standing up a virtual machine, and you have responsibility from the operating system all the way up the stack to the application and the information and the data on that. But then we start getting into some of the platform services and software as a service, such as SaaS services such as Microsoft 365, and we start to give away some of those responsibilities where, across the board, all of the physical hosts, the physical network, the physical data center, all pertain to responsibilities that Microsoft or the cloud provider take on. We start getting into different gray areas here, and you can see here from when we go into platform services, it is a shared responsibility. It depends on the service type and depends on what might be turned on. So there's certain levels of security that Microsoft takes on when you move into platform services or you move into SaaS services, but there's also different services that you have to turn on or configure. And that's really where that shared responsibility gray area takes place, is you need to make a informed decision in terms of, do I need advanced security features and things like that? And we can talk more about some of those when we get into the demo and start talking about and start showing some areas within the Microsoft ecosystem where you can turn on and utilize some of these advanced features. And as we talk and move into talking about data accessibility and availability, we start talking about what are the influencing factors around that. And that the main two influencing factors are users and organizations. Users want access to the files. They want to access that information when they have access to it. The organization wants to protect that information. They want availability. They want the retention. They want secure access. And there's this tug of war that takes place as you put more security controls in place, and finding a happy medium around how to maintain the confidentiality, integrity, and security of your environment and managing that change and managing change management with your users becomes very important. So what is data accessibility and availability? I've mentioned it a few times, and really what we're worried about here in terms of your data is being able to access your data. And this goes into the user environment. They want to be able to access data from multiple sources have it available when needed, and it needs to have security against unauthorized access and principle of least privilege. So, the first two bullets really go into that user's need, and then the second two really come into play the organization and what the organization wants to make sure that users that access that data only have access to the information that they need to perform their job and perform their duties and get the work done throughout the day. So how does that work in terms of the public cloud, in terms of services then that help with public cloud data accessibility and availability? So there are a lot of services, and the first is identity management. Identity management in the cloud is a little bit different than within your own on-premises network, where we have traditionally worked within Active Directory domain services. Once you start moving into the cloud, you start using cloud identities. And within the Microsoft ecosystem, we're talking about Azure Active Directory. You might have different identities in terms of, within your Facebook account or your LinkedIn account, your personal Microsoft accounts. All of those identities all filter into a lot of those environments as well. So you need to think about how those all play and how we're providing access and managing access, and some of the key ways to protect our accessibility to data and authenticate properly and not give too many people roles, access to data they shouldn't have access to, is utilizing role-based access control, putting multi-factor authentication in place to make sure you're maintaining integrity and making sure people are who they say they are, and then conditional access policies and privileged identity management to do additional filtering in terms of identifying areas of high risk, and also decreasing your attack surface. Of privileged identity management provides a decrease in your attack surface of administrative privileges within your environment by providing only administrative privileges for set amounts of time, and having access reviews and things to make sure that people continue to need and require that level of access, but also then it then decreases the level of which you might be at risk for somebody that might spoof or gain access to the administrative login privileges. If you have privileged identity management that has expired or is at least turned off at time set, then you're not leaving yourself open to a potential attack based on an elevated privilege. From a storage account standpoint, as we talk through the services, having service level agreements, having different replication around protecting your services. Storage accounts within the Azure environment have multiple options in terms of how the data is replicated to protect the data. Putting lifecycle management and soft delete within storage accounts maintains the accessibility. Azure storage accounts have a 99.99 availability rate, which means that they're going to that Microsoft is going to adhere to saying that your storage account is may only go down at most 5 minutes per month. Anything over that 5 minutes, they'll give service credits on. So very low or very high level of service level and availability to your storage account. And with your storage account protection, all storage accounts have storage service encryption at rest. So every piece of data that is stored at rest is encrypted. And if you turn on TLS services for HTTPS only, then you also have full encryption in transit as well. From a database protection standpoint, within the database services within Azure, you have replication and backups inherent to managed SQL database platforms. You can put elastic pools in place to maintain availability during high volume times. And again, different levels of encryption. You have transparent disk encryption, as well as all-time encryption, as well as some dynamic masking and things, which we'll also talk about in a minute. And then finally out of here, advanced threat protection, or what Microsoft has actually renamed Microsoft Defender, ATP, and it put that Defender name in most of their threat protection services now, and identity protection services can help to monitor user behavior and protects our identities through Defender identity protection, reducing those attack surfaces, identifying suspicious activities, investigating alerts and activities, and all of this ties into the global threat protection umbrella of Microsoft and what they know in terms of global threats. And then the next piece to talk about is confidentiality, integrity, and compliance. As we put together how we're protecting data, we have accessibility and availability, and then from that, how do we keep that data and that information confidential? How do we maintain integrity, and then how do we maintain then any compliance to regulatory standards? So those are all things that we have to take into account when we're thinking about securing our data. So how does Microsoft do that? And so different things, again, different services that we can put in place for that integrity of data is key management, utilizing our own customer managed keys for storing and accessing secrets, and authorizing the access to resources. Again, role-based access control comes into play here. Monitoring the usage and the access to information through activity logs, and protecting and rotating those secrets within our applications, rather than maintaining keeping a policy in place that we're rotating the secrets, and we're not affecting application data, but we are making sure that we are not exposing our secrets, or where somebody can find out our secrets and exploit them with an attack. They're going, if you rotate them, it's just like changing your password and in your own personal life, every 90 days. That way, you're giving them a moving target in terms of attackers go. Information protection, data classification, having data classified, putting labels on your data, utilizing rights management and things like that, help to maintain the integrity of that data, help to also build retention policies for regulatory means as well. Data protection, database protection. We talked about this, and I went over and mentioned, in addition to the availability and accessibility of databases, protecting that data and that database is important as well. And you can do that with different, with dynamic data masking policies, running vulnerability assessments within your database, data discovery and classification, automated classification of your data, and then compliance capabilities within Azure database services. And to kind of bring that all together before we start getting into some of the monitoring and management pieces is really Azure Monitor. And Azure Monitor brings together how we I've brought up activity logs, and how we can take build agents in terms of our local environment, our on-premises virtual machines out to those machines, as well as within the Azure environment. Azure Monitor continues to run and can gather activity logs, diagnostic logs. We can run Network Watcher on hybrid networks that can then bring in rich information that we can alert and create actions upon. And to govern our services, we have then Azure Policy, which can govern our costs of services through and govern sovereignty of where our our services can be located within our subscription or our resource group, as well as bridging a lot of those shared responsibility gaps that we talked about when we were talking about shared responsibility. Putting policies in place to require certain extensions to be put on virtual machines for monitoring agents or anti-malware, or to require multi-factor authentication and comply with certain regulatory services as well. We have initiatives, which are a group of policies that can be put in place with a list of controls that can be utilized for regulatory audits. And then Azure Security Center provides then a central dashboard for all of that. It can provide information around our identity management and role-based access control rules, what we're doing in terms of multi-factor authentication, all of our monitoring, update management policies, analytics, Defender threat protection, all filters into Azure Security Center. So that ties us into how now, and how we kind of wrap all of this around one small package of how now we're going to deliver the security and accessibility of our data within our Azure house. And how do we do that is around security and compliance. And I mentioned it was Security Center, that it is that central location that provides you with that defense and the way to monitor that defense in depth security posture, and how we can monitor resources and best practices within our environment, review network topologies and how traffic can potentially cause an external threat, and monitor and alert using the advanced threat analysis and global threat intelligence of the Azure environment. So what I'm going to do now is really go into the Azure portal, and we'll talk about the Azure Security Center, as well as I can show you guys a little bit about Azure Sentinel. And I don't see the chat grid. Is there anybody with any questions while I get myself over there?
Not yet.
No questions? All right. So you should be seeing my Azure portal now. And so we have Azure Security Center right here. And one of the great things about Azure Security Center is it helps you to govern your environment. And this provides you then with that defense in depth, and shows you and can guide you to that defense in depth approach. There's one thing that I wanted to point out here. There's two different flavors of Azure Security Center. You get a certain level of Azure Security Center just setting up an Azure environment. And what those are in terms of your capabilities are, and Microsoft just changed this after Ignite. It was called Basic and Standard Services. Now there's Azure Defender Off and Azure Defender On. So your free service is right here on Azure Defender Off, and you get continuous assessment and security recommendations among all your resources automatically when you turn on an Azure subscription. So there is a certain level of governance of your protection of your data and protection of your Azure house as we go through and set up any service within Azure. It's going to continually assess that and give those that information continuously to you in terms of recommendations and in terms of your Azure Secure Score, which kind of is just a logarithm of how well you're doing in terms of in relation to Azure's best practices and Microsoft's best practices for security. And then if you turn Defender on, which I have turned on already within my environment, you have all of these other things in terms of just-in-time virtual machine access, which is very similar to privileged identity management, where it's time-based access to that'll open up an RDP port or an SSH port to access a virtual machine on a 3-hour window, rather than leaving that port open to potential attacks. Adaptive controls and network hardening. The regulatory compliance dashboard, which I'll show you in a minute, is one big thing that you get with Defender On. You get the regulatory compliance dashboard. So if you're in a regulated industry, you can build policies, initiatives, and monitor how you stand on that, going up, an audit on a regular basis, or even if you're about to get audited, and figure out what you need to do to pass your audit. If I go back to my overview page, you can see right off the bat, we have our secure score here and what we have in terms of our controls and our recommendations. Over on the right here, we have some insights on some recommendations and prevalent recommendations that I might need to turn on in terms of certain accounts. You can see here, storage account. I have public access allowed on a couple resources just for demo purposes. We're showing how you can do public access to present an image on your website and things like that earlier this week in a class that I was training. So it's flagging me on that. But you can go into the secure score and you can view recommendations in the secure score and immediately determine and prioritize what you need to do to protect your Azure environment and continue to implement additional controls that will help you in your environment. You can see here, if I go, I'm trying to find one here, some of these will provide you even with just quick fix buttons that will put that control in motion and remediate that control right away. Others that don't have that, actually, when you go there, it will tell you what steps to take to put that control in place. So very powerful central source for managing the policies within your environment. If I go to regulatory compliance, I can choose, there are 4 that come up automatically within the Azure environment, and that's the SOC standards, ISO 27001, PCI for credit card standards, and then Azure's CIS benchmark, which is just a benchmark standard of security. But we can go in and we can add additional policies if we wanted to our subscription. And it'll take us into policies, and we can add more standards here if we are a HIPAA high trust type organization, or if we are doing federal government and we need to be NIST compliant. If we're in the UK and we want the UK official and UK NHS compliance, we can put these in place, and it will then monitor your environment. It puts a policy that are in place, an initiative in place, really, that's a group of policies that is then going to audit your environment and put you in a compliant state within your environment. So if I go to any of these and go to, you can see for the CIS, I have a red area here because I don't have MFA across my subscription. And I typically in a demo environment get that all the time because I don't turn on MFA for test users and things like that. So if I was to turn that on, this would go green and I'd be ready with identity on my audit. As I have more services created, like it says there are no guest users. So as I turn more services on, then some of these might go to green, they might go to red, but they'll present themselves as part of the audit for identity and management. If I look down further and I look at virtual machines, I don't have my data disks or my operating system disks encrypted. I haven't turned on Azure Disk Encryption on my virtual machines, so I can do that and turn these to green. So if I'm getting audited on this particular compliance initiative, I can do that. So Security Center is a really powerful tool for providing those compliances and for protecting your environment. And the last thing I wanted to show real quick was Azure Sentinel. And Azure Sentinel here, we can connect multiple data sources from both inside the Azure and Microsoft 365 environment, as well as within outside third-party services that feed into Sentinel and can take those logs and provide you with information and a central source for alerting and incident reporting and hunting on potential threats as well. So So I always recommend from a monitoring and management approach to making sure that you are protecting your environment and protecting that overall Azure and Microsoft 365 house, that Security Center and Azure Sentinel should be at the center of all that, as far as monitoring, making sure that everything is accessible and available to you when needed. Any questions? I'll pause then for questions. I've been talking at you guys for 40 minutes now. Any particular questions anybody has?
Hey, here Manikandan.
Yes, what?
Here Manikandan, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, yeah. So quick question on Azure Security Sentinel with landing zone. Okay, so do we have any blueprint which is available for any enterprise organization? I mean, like predefined policy, something we have for Security Sentinel side.
For like you're talking about, you mentioned landing zone, so you're talking about in terms of like the cloud adoption frameworks and the well-architected frameworks. Is that what you're talking about?
Right, yeah.
They haven't really pulled anything into there yet. But the interesting thing that you mentioned that, because I just did with one of my friends from Microsoft yesterday, one of the cloud advocates. Me and her were talking about cloud adoption framework, and Microsoft has built some assessment tools for cloud adoption framework, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of that started finding its way like into different policies and into different initiatives, but I haven't seen anything pop up yet, and we can check that right now even. Yeah, so there's nothing yet in terms of cloud adoption framework or landing zones that have made their way into policies and into Security Center, but wouldn't be surprised if it didn't very soon, because some of the things that came out of Ignite, if you paid attention to any of the announcements at Ignite, was, and I mentioned it a little bit with Azure Advanced Threat Protection became Microsoft Defender, ATP. Identity Protection actually became Microsoft Defender for Identity. And all of that is actually moving its way into Security Center, even from Microsoft 365 standpoint, where Microsoft 365 services, they kind of had their own security and compliance portal. They had their service trust portal and things like that. They are bringing a lot of those interfaces into Security Center now. So, and I would venture to say that as they build out more automation around cloud adoption framework and well-architected framework and landing zones and all that we'll start seeing a lot of that. Where I'm seeing it popping up right now is in terms of planning and using Azure DevOps for planning those services and planning and giving you guidance to how you're architecting those landing zones and things like that. But I wouldn't be surprised if that started to find its way into Security Center and into a lot of policies and initiatives going forward.
So Dwayne, I've got a question for you.
Sure.
So with Azure Security Center, when you enable Defender, are you doing that for the entire subscription? Can you do that on a, let's say, a per host perspective? What's the scope of turning that on?
The scope is pretty wide range across the subscription. So if I go into my pricing and I look at my subscription, you actually can turn it off here if you look at, so you can get a little granular if you don't want it on your servers. You don't want to pay $15 a month on a server, or you want it on different things. You just want it on storage account. I can pull these off if I wanted to. If I'm not using any servers or things like that. Nice thing about Security Center as well is they give you a 30-day trial to it as well. So you can turn it on for 30 days and determine, you know what, I'm not using any of these advanced features like I need to. So, getting continuous assessments and managing my secure score is enough for me to get recommendations and be able to harden my environment. So I could just let that trial expire and not worry about it. like I said, I always think that if you're if you are going to need to be compliant to some sort of regulatory compliance, and that is going to be audited on a regular basis, this will pay for itself, because the amount of time that it's going to decrease your audit is going to be so much better than what it's going to probably cost you to run this service. You know, I don't know if anybody's done a self HIPAA audit, but I've worked for some MSPs that we would have to audit our services on our data center, and those were just time consuming. They took weeks to do and multiple resources to do it, and it was a pain in the butt. So being able to look at my resources and say, hey, my controls for HIPAA are all in place, it pays for itself there.
What do you think is the biggest mistake that companies make that are brand new to the cloud? Maybe they're used to the hardened perimeter, being on-prem, you know, the pace of change and innovation much more, a little more slow on-prem than it is in the cloud, and being a fast-moving, innovative environment. What do you think are the top 1 or 2 mistakes that you see where people go to an Azure environment? What do you think anyone listening in could learn from that?
I think the biggest area that you have to take into account is around identity and access management, elevated privilege. You know, making sure that you don't have elevated privileges, that you are going by the zero trust model. I just finished today giving the AZ 500 course this week, and Microsoft has continued to add more and more. The entire first day of that course is talking about identity management, and that is really the biggest mistake is thinking that Azure Active Directory is the same as on-premises Active Directory, and having too many administrators, you know, people given administrator roles, you know, so having multi-factor authentication in place, and even, you know, springing for the premium subscription that gives the ability to put privileged identity management and conditional access policies in place are probably recommendation number 1 when you move into the cloud, because you're in a flat identity environment now. You're not in as many, you know, you don't have the forests and the different grouping, you know, group policies in place that you have in a traditional Active Directory environment, and you can't take that for granted. Especially, like you said, you don't have the control over the perimeter that you used to when you go into the cloud.
All right, thanks for that.
Yeah, Jeff, Mani here. In addition to add quick comments. So what happened, most of the industry initially what happened 4 years back, everyone want to move to the cloud. Okay, they don't have any planning. Okay, see, so to answer your question, like what mistake usually they do that, like they are just plan to move to the Azure, but they don't have any idea, like if infrastructure server, like VMware server or physical server, if you are doing lift and shift, what happened if the cost will be almost the double of the cost, which is the same like on-prem how we are spending, right? So the mistake currently all the enterprise what doing is they are making the mistake the planning. Okay, let's example they have a 10 SQL server, right? While moving, they should be planned how we can adopt the consolidation or would be manage the SQL instance. Such a way we have to plan then moving to the Azure. If you're not making that kind of plan, of course, like again we have to pay for the on-prem cost as well as on Azure cost as well. So most of the companies, the mistake right now we're doing, they are not doing any planning. They are just lift and shift onto the Azure. So before moving to that, they have to do multiple planning in terms of hybrid cloud side, in terms of security, in terms of cloud native, migration side, which is like a container-based migration. So those kind of, mistakes, a couple of organizations they're doing.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Yeah. And it's ironic, right? Because no one would ever move into a brand new data center without planning.
Right.
But they're perfectly happy to put everything up there in Azure with no planning. And I think sometimes
start standing up some virtual machines.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. interesting.
And I think, that's exactly what Microsoft's been trying, and even, even AWS, does the same thing with their well-architected framework. They both have well-architected framework, but the cloud adoption framework takes it a step further because there is so much involved in that with planning. And one of the things I even learned this week, like I was saying, when I did this talk with one of the cloud advocates, was that Microsoft has now put all of that in Azure DevOps. And you can actually, it has essentially your plan all laid out for you, templated out for you, so you can go and follow their best practices to defining your strategy and discovering your environment and planning out how you're going to migrate to the cloud, and taking into account some of those best practice pieces that people don't think about, and that others have learned through just willy-nilly jumping into the cloud and have stepped back and had their lessons learned. Well, Microsoft's taken all those lessons learned and put it into the cloud adoption framework.
Yeah. Well, I don't think Microsoft does anyone a positive service when you create a VM and you just do the VNet as a side event, right? Okay, because it's like, okay, I need a server. Oh, I need to pop it into VNet. Here's the drop-down list. I'll pick that one. Without actually planning your IP schema and subnets and all of that. It almost be better. Yeah, you plan the virtual network first, and then we'll allow you to put some virtual servers in there. But true. That's just me.
True. Yeah. Chicken and egg conversation, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Dwayne, while you're on this page, it's Keith Miller here. I was curious, a question on pricing, and I was kind of following along with our own corporate subscription here, and we are probably 95% in Azure. We only have a couple of really large SQL boxes on premise. Everything else is in the cloud already. But going through here, I'm kind of getting sticker shock when I see things like $15 per instance per month for application services, and according to this, I have 185 instances of that. Is there some sort of methodology, or are we doing this wrong? I mean, we have a ton of functions, a ton of web apps. We've kind of very architected that way our applications, where you split it out like that. And I work as part of the DevOps team, and we do everything as IAC here, and very controlled organization as far as that goes. But recommending this to management, to say, hey, as we are going through audits right now, that's something to help us. Well, this is quite a cost.
Well, the way to think about it is what percentage of it is it really to your servers, to your server environment necessarily. If you're running a server that's $200 or $300 a month, this is less than a 10% upcharge on that, right? So if you think about that, and you think about the time that it's going to, if you are a regulatory compliant company that needs to go through an audit, and the time that it might help you in and decrease the amount of time, it's doing a cost analysis from that standpoint of how much manpower is it going to require me to be prepared for this audit versus the cost that it's going to take to turn these services on. Now, from a standpoint, like I said, you can go in and turn these services on and off as much as you want too. So if you just have an audit once a year, you could turn this on for a month. Maybe it does give you some upcharge, but it also might save you thousands of dollars and days that you have a consultant on site performing the audit as well. So I understand, like, if you do have like hundreds and thousands of servers, that $15 per server becomes a big sticker price. But it's like I said, it's all a cost analysis. And like I said, you can watch put this on for a month as a trial, and it's not costing you anything. And like I said, you have audits or whatever, you can do that. But otherwise, if you have it off, you still get the same benchmark, secure benchmark recommendations that everybody does, not having it on. So,
and this is where I think segmentation is your friend. You know, if you've got highly sensitive servers, you've got some workloads that are PCI or HIPAA in scope and other production workloads that aren't. This is to encourage you to say, hey, put that in a separate subscription, turn on Defender for that, and maybe not for the ones that don't have the same level of sensitivity.
Yep. No, that's a perfect point, Jeff. Yep, exactly. You can have multiple subscriptions in your environment and turn it on at the subscription level. Exactly.
That's a good one. All right. Yeah. Thanks for the info. We'll look at some of that. Appreciate it.
No problem. Glad to help.
Elliot, did you have a comment on that?
You're on mute.
No, so not directly on that point. I think from some of the people I was speaking to before this talk, with the whole kind of adoption of cloud, and I guess them looking at their kind of team strategy and split up of security engineers versus DevOps versus software engineers, I think they're trying to incorporate some of this in, not necessarily have an out-and-out security engineer, but maybe having DevOps pick up some of the security side, having some of the engineers look at it. What would be the best kind of starting point for them in kind of that Azure space to kind of maybe some material or websites that they'd kind of be able to, I guess, help them on that journey, really, just to...
one of the best free places is Microsoft Learn, and going on to Microsoft Learn and just, going through the content on there based on, the different roles or just different services. You can, there's thousands of hours of content on there. Microsoft Docs, and Microsoft Docs is great, to learn about specific services and can step you through different tutorials and how-tos right within the service documentation. And you can usually Microsoft Learn and Microsoft Docs, the links are all tied together. So that's where I always tell people a good first step is to do that. And then if you're thinking about going forward with additional certifications and stuff, then you look at different companies like skillmeup.com, like mine, or different courses on Udemy and things like that. There's lots of resources out there. There's lots of YouTube info and YouTube channels. I've been doing a lot of security and networking, just 15-minute videos on my YouTube channel to provide information and just help people learn more about how this all goes together and what takes place within the environment and how you start piecing everything together. So there's lots of people out there, lots of MVPs that provide lots of free information out there, but I always say Microsoft Learn's a good first point to just really start diving into things.
Cool. No, amazing.
And I think people should keep in mind that Microsoft has a great partnership with Pluralsight, so you can get free Azure training on Pluralsight. And not as just a competitor, Dwayne, to your company.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I generally button my lip about them, but I have used them.
but my loyalty has to be to the community. And,
I agree.
So there is free Azure training on Pluralsight.
And also, if you like to have a workshop session kind of material learning, please go ahead to GitHub. Okay, now GitHub have lot of material with the step-by-step material which is from AWS, Google, any cloud, as well as multi-cloud side as well as lot of materials in GitHub now.
Absolutely.
There is
that's a great resource that a lot of people forget about.
Yeah, and Microsoft Learn's tied to that too. You can go to github.microsoft /learning and you can find step through labs for every one of the certifications right within there.
And I would say, unlike GitHub, that has usually high quality information, if you leverage YouTube, there is some good content out there, but there's a lot of bad content out there also. So, it's free, which is great, but you have to be careful about who you're going to listen to on YouTube.
Yeah. Just watch all Dwayne's stuff.
Dwayne,
Exactly.
Thanks, Elliot.
Captain Hyperscaler, then you know it's good stuff.
Yeah. Exactly. I'm sure, like, we're going to release this video to the whole group and a number of different other groups. So I'm sure there'll be more questions. So I hope you don't mind me kind of sending those across to you on LinkedIn or something.
Of course.
Next week or something, just because.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, there'll definitely be some points that people want to pick your brains on. But no, is it any other questions at all from anyone?
Dwayne, I got a quick question. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
In a multi-account setup, the way Jeff was suggesting, will Security Center let you manage those from a singular point, or are you now forced to use Security Center from each tenant or account?
Yeah, I think Security Center isn't is subscription specific, so I don't think you can do multiple subscriptions within there. I haven't tried it, but I think that it is subscription specific for each of the environments. So you would have to toggle between the directory essentially for that particular subscription to manage the Security Center in that one.
Okay.
Here, Mani. Sorry, last question. I'm the first time I'm attending this meetup from online, and because I was in India, now I recently moved to UK. And what is the frequency? What is the timeline? Or we are using this kind of sessions. So like frequently we have, or monthly, or weekly. So is there any time scale we have?
Jeff, do you want to answer that one, or shall I? Or
I'm sorry. Say that one more time.
He's just wondering the frequency of your meetups.
Yeah.
So every month.
Okay.
Sorry, I was looking up cross-tenant with Security Center.
Cross-tenant Security Center. Doing a little.
So there is a way to set it up. I'm just going to post a URL out here if someone wants to.
I thought I had that question one other time, and I thought somebody had said that as well. But yeah, I think there's some configuration that you have to do for that.
Yeah. So every month, come rain or shine, I think what we might do in December is I think we should have some kind of networking event and make it a little more maybe fun. I need to talk to Sam and Elliot about this, but December sometimes might be a time for us to have something less hardcore and maybe something a little more networking and people getting to know each other, maybe a bit of trivia or a prize giveaway, but we'll try to do something every month for sure.
Yeah, sure, Jeff. Sure. Always include me as well going forward. I'm very keen to contribute. Yeah.
We'll have a Christmas quiz or something. Yeah, something fun like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm ex-Microsoft. So almost 5-6 years I was in Microsoft. Yeah, that's right. Okay.
Amazing. Well, yeah. Is any other questions? Last minute questions before we wrap up. No. There's been a few, so it's always a good sign.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, Dwayne, thanks again for supporting the group. We'll I'll send you the link to the video when we've kind of sorted it all out, and we'll whack it up on YouTube. Just to get a few more people listening to it, watching it, and following you on your platforms, and hopefully learning from you in the future.
Yeah, and I always have guest speakers at my own user group. We meet third Wednesday of every month as well, and usually have a Azure MVP or Microsoft 365 MVP that speaks at that. It's usually not me speaking unless I can't find anybody. I use other people to speak for that. I'll speak to other groups.
That's what we do. Yeah.
Yep. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it, and let me know if you ever want me back.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, we'll take you up on that.
Thanks, Dwayne. Thanks everyone for attending.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Have a good night, everybody.